All righty. Well, great. My name is Chuck Watts, past president of the First Empathy Surplus Congress and your Zoom master. Today's the March 2021 Caring Citizen Solution Day Speakers Series. And our keynote speaker is Carolyn Jones, former Alaskan Assistant Attorney General, as well as former Rotary International trustee. And welcome, Carolyn. And before I introduce Carolyn properly, President Anna, I'd like to recognize our participants today. We've got Mary Beth from Maineville, and Matthew Medane from Santa Clarita, California, Aaron Rosiello from Maineville, Ohio, Greg Kennedy from Paynesville, Ohio, Anna Bruffy, our president from Virginia Beach, visiting in Bellbrook, Ohio, and Fitz Alert, UN envoy from Guyana. Not sure, Fitz is having a little trouble with his audio, and Miriam Spate from Wilmington, Ohio. So glad everybody's here. President Anna, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you, Chuck. Welcome to the First Empathy Surplus Congress. We are a member organization of the Empathy Surplus Project, which is a 501c3 volunteer collective throughout leadership, training, communities of practice. Every day, we strive to frame a caring society that promotes stronger people, progressive markets, better futures, effective government, and mutual responsibility. We do these 4 empathic activities, and I'm going to ask our congressional board members to tell us the 4 empathic activities are.
Absolutely. Thank you, President Anna. All of our 4 empathic activities keep us aligned with our collective thought leadership training mission. And the actions all start with the letter I, inward digestion, investment, implementation, and invitation. Inward digestion, we inwardly digest and use the latest brain insights of Dr. George Lakoff to frame daily caring conversations to promote human rights. Miriam.
Investment. We invest in weekly congressional hearings about how we apply Dr. Lakoff's insights to advance caring policy directions. Greg?
Implementation. We implement caring policy directions through partnerships with ethical businesses, effective government task forces, and other caring societal organizations. Chuck?
And an invitation. We invite others to join us and promote a politics of care. So back to you, Anna.
Thank you, everyone. Greg, would you please tell everyone how they can help build an empathy surplus in their communities with human rights pocketbook value?
Sure. Thank you, President Anna. I'd be happy to. Our parent organization, the Empathy Surplus Project, has been a member of the United Nations Global Compact since 2014. We believe our 4 empathic activities align well with the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. The Global Compact wants its partners to unite their activities around 10 principles to make progress on human rights, living, work, leisure, and anti-corruption of government for the sake of climate survival. We launched the Human Rights Pocketbook Venture in 2018. Together with financial partners and volunteers, we distributed a personal pocketbook copy of the Illustrated Universal Declaration of Human Rights every year in our centers of influence to every student in kindergarten, 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th grades, as well as first-year college students. We are currently distributing just under 2,000 copies per year and hope you can help us double that this year. You will be able to find a link for more information at our YouTube channel. Back to you, Anna.
Thank you, Greg. Chuck, would you like to introduce our speaker, please?
You bet, you bet. Our keynote speaker today is Rotarian for Peace, Carolyn Jones, whom I met through our mutual participation in the Rotary Action Group for Peace. And I invited Carolyn to speak to the Caring Citizens Solution Day speaker series after she spoke to my World Peace Rotary Club on systemic racism just a few weeks ago. Small town girl from Tarrytown, New York. Carolyn graduated from Stanford University with distinction, received her LLB from Yale Law School. She practiced law for 31 years, was an assistant attorney general for the state of Alaska, attorney general's office for 23 years, and a supervising attorney in the office during the last 7 years before her retirement in 1998. She's currently living in Alaska. I remember Carolyn was a little reluctant to speak to our group about systemic racism because she speaks mostly to Rotarians, and I really appreciated the way that she opened that conversation. She envisioned herself in the group trying to answer hard questions, and I assured her that her natural exercise of empathy, that is trying to put herself in our position, was precisely why we really wanted her to speak. Furthermore, some people like Carolyn are just natural politicians of care, wherever they find themselves. Politicians of care or diplomats of care or what all of us at the Empathy Surplus Project are aspiring to be in our family or our work or play in the public square. And Dr. Lakoff's work in cognitive science, linguistics, and metaphor research helped to identify two major nation as metaphors, nation as family metaphors that dominate all of our political and moral conversations. Moreover, no one who's having a conversation and voicing an opinion ever says, this is what I think, and you should listen to me because I'm wrong. Nobody says that. On the contrary, we all think we're right, which is a moral and a political stance. And because 98% of all thought is unconscious, we're mostly unaware when we're talking with our friends, whether we're using the strict father model of metaphor of governing or a nurturant parent model of governing. So consequently, we're here in our Empathy Surplus Congress, we try to be intentional about framing our world from a nurturing point of view. And Carolyn is a natural nurturer. In fact, she's traveled to Russia 35 times in her service to Rotary. 5 of those trips as a Rotary volunteer. I'm going to post a link to the July 2002 Rotarian magazine about her venture to Russia. It's a moving story. Her story's also in the it was entitled Children of Russia. And Carolyn has 2 adult daughters, Nina and Carrie, no grandchildren yet. She loves to fish for salmon, hike Alaska's many trails, watch American football and baseball games, see the world, and count the stars in the bottom of her champagne glass. So help me welcome Carolyn as a strong, empathic soul and natural nurturer.
Thank you, Chuck, for that overly generous introduction.
You deserve it.
Chuck is correct that what I'm about to say to you today, I pretty much just only said to Rotarians, but with the changing of a word here and there, frankly, I think it's something that can resonate with you and with just about any American and many people around the world as well. It's a story that overtook me last May, and it wouldn't let me go until I wrote it, and it continues to be rewritten even up till last night. It was May 25th, 2020, when 17-year-old Darnella Frazier, a Black female in Minneapolis, Minnesota, stood her ground and with nothing more than a cell phone, unflinchingly recorded the murder of George Floyd. a black male being subdued by a cop pinning his knee on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. During that time, Floyd cried that he couldn't breathe. He called out to his deceased mother. Onlookers pleaded with the officer to remove his knee as Floyd could not breathe. During that time, the officer looked up and looked directly at the young woman and into the camera. He was unmoved, and George Floyd died. It's been over 60 years since America's Blacks began protesting for racial equality. I'm old enough to remember 1955 when Rosa Parks, a tired Black woman in Alabama, boarded a bus, sat in the front seat, and refused to yield when a white passenger demanded his right. The Montgomery bus boycott followed for over a year and is regarded as the first large-scale US demonstration against segregation. Ultimately, the US Supreme Court declared segregated busing to be a violation of our Constitution. I remember the Greensboro, North Carolina sit-in, a civil rights protest in 1960, when young African-American students staged a sit-in at a segregated lunch counter at Woolworth's Five and Dime store. Though arrested for their conduct, the protest had a lasting impact nationwide and forced Woolworths and other stores to alter their racist practices. And of course, I remember 1965, when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led thousands of nonviolent demonstrators to the steps of the Capitol in Montgomery, Alabama, after a 5-day, 55-mile march from Selma to protest the lack of voting rights for African Americans, thus leading to the passage of the Voting Rights Act. And at the same time, I remember living happily, safely, securely in Trieste, Italy, where I was the only person of color in the entire town, and the townspeople were thrilled that I was there. Like the sitcom Cheers, everybody knew my name. The Triestines loved me. Yet instead of hunkering down there in my safe cocoon, I came home in 1967 because my country was burning and I wanted to be home to be a part of the solution. In my small way, I tried to do my part as a legal services poverty lawyer in California and later as a human rights lawyer in Alaska. And over time, I actually believed I saw progress, that I saw change. Until the evening of May 25th, 2020, when Darnella Frazier risked her own safety and the entire world saw the truth about how George Floyd died. And I thought, oh crap. Over 60 years have passed and nothing has changed. You know, it is still true that a few rogue police officers around the US continue to abuse, injure, and even murder Black people, and usually without accountability. But I am wrong about one thing: something has changed. Darnella's quick thinking and courage changed the course of history in this country and sparked a new, more diverse movement than over 60 years ago. Back in the late 50s and 60s, the people marching for peace and justice were almost all Blacks. But this time, all America is protesting. In one city, a line of middle-aged white women leaked arms and stood in front of the protesters as a shield against. Are we okay? And stood in front of the protesters as a shield against the line of law enforcement. In another city, the whites marching outnumbered the people of color. A massive Black Lives Matter protest held in Nashville was organized by 6 white and Black teenage girls who met online and wanted to honor the memory of George Floyd. Researchers say these protests, now in their 8th month, are the largest in US history, having spread to well over 650 cities and towns across all 50 states. We have seen a real and meaningful change in public opinion on racial issues and policing. The sports world has a huge platform in this country and is speaking out at every level. 70 members of the Denver Broncos football staff and team led thousands in a Black Lives Matter protest to the state capitol. The San Antonio Spurs basketball coach called on white people to call out racism, no matter the consequences. Coach K, Duke University Blue Devils college basketball, said Black Lives Matter is not a political issue, it's a human rights issue. The Ole Miss and Oklahoma football teams, including their head coaches, marched together for social justice. and they jointly took a knee before their season opener. NASCAR no longer flies the Confederate flag at its car races. And most recently, Major League Baseball has recognized the Negro Baseball League that played from 1920 to 1948, and its achievements are now included into the Major League Baseball League's statistics as a part of Major League Baseball history. It genuinely feels like a national racial reckoning, a reckoning extending well beyond the sports world. Disney's retheming Splash Mountain, its amusement because of racial stereotypes that the film is based upon. HBO pulled the film classic Gone with the Wind to add historical content. NASA is naming the space agency's building after Mary Jackson, the first African-American female engineer and a heroine in the movie Hidden Figures. Princeton has renamed its residential college, formerly Woodrow Wilson, but now after a Black female alumna and donor. And the state of Rhode Island, that little state just east of Connecticut, until last year, its official legal name has always been the State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. But last year, the voters voted to eliminate the words and Providence Plantations. And just this month, or last month, the TV reality shows The Bachelor and The Bachelorette are in a shambles amid an uproar over a belated reveal of racist conduct by one of the frontrunners for the heart of the first Black bachelor. Since these protests began, you've seen genuine and sincere movement, action to examine and change disrespectful and racist names of sports teams. Today, the NFL football team in our nation's capital is known only as the Washington football team. And a Major League Baseball team in Cleveland is also removing its Native American name. Change and race and rejecting racist images is happening in our marketing, on our pancake box, our rice box, our ice cream bar. We're removing racist symbolism, such as the statues of Confederate generals, the names of Confederate generals from military bases, and even the longtime name Dixie is being abandoned by country western singers, a beer label, and a university. Countless businesses, organizations, and individuals this time have issued written statements condemning racism. And this change in the air is not just in the US. In fact, the world is protesting against racism. Protests have been held in London, Rome, Berlin, Toronto, Jerusalem, Dublin, Tokyo, Paris, Sydney, Melbourne, Lebanon, to name a few. The Formula One race car drivers at the Austrian Grand Prix were wearing shirts that read "End Racism," and they took a knee. BTS, the Korean boy band, contributed 1 million to the Black Lives Matter movement and asked its fans to match, and the fans did it. Last July, the city of Paris inaugurated a public garden honoring Solitude. She's a pregnant free slave who was jailed for her activities to liberate slaves on the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe. She gave birth in jail and was executed the following day. Last December, French and Turkish soccer players walked out of a match in Paris after accusing a referee of making a racist remark. They would only continue the game after a new set of officials was sent in. And most recently of all, a Norwegian member of parliament has nominated the Black Lives Matter movement for the Nobel Peace Prize. So today's civil rights movement does not resemble the civil rights movement I remember of the 1960s. Today, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of white people have taken to the streets, thousands of whom have been tear gassed, beaten, or chased down by the police. Perhaps not coincidentally, there's never been a moment when the authorities, school boards, city councils, mayors seem so willing to embrace policies that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. These changes are a reflection that white America in increasing numbers is finally waking up. But we're not done until we tackle the harder stuff, institutional or systemic racism, too long embedded as a normal practice within our society. It's led to discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, among other issues. Tackling these issues means getting justice for George Floyd and those who went before and after him, dead at the hands of excessive police force. Tackling these issues means leveling the educational playing field and ensuring that minority and disadvantaged children have equal access to an education that lifts them up. Tackling these issues means equal employment opportunities. So I want to toss out a few examples of how you can make a difference. In the interest of time, I'm going to focus on just one area where institutional racism should be addressed and where you can make a difference as an individual or organization. That's education, and especially in these pandemic times. Distance learning is producing a lost generation of kids and deepening the divide between rich and poor. Just consider the impact of pandemic-related school closings and distance learning on disadvantaged children. Many minorities have low-income parents who need to work, not stay home and teach. The parents may lack the academic background even suited to teach kids. Parents may speak English as a second language or not at all. They may not have an internet or the computer, or just one computer for several siblings to compete for a single device. There may not be adequate space in the home for a quiet work area. So these already disadvantaged kids are falling further behind with this loss of education. Think about it. How do you recover a lost half year? Do you ever? Pick a school in a low-income neighborhood. Ask the principal, what are the needs? For example, a reading program, volunteer tutors, books, backpacks, computer tablets. Partnering with a Boys and Girls Club to offer after-school help. How about providing flashcards and educational toys, finger puppets of diverse historical figures for classrooms and school libraries? Contribute copies of Amanda Gorman's books, The Hill We Climb and Change Things, to school libraries, or provide video recordings of her delivery at this year's inauguration. You could recognize special educators. Could a Teacher of the Month be named who inspires minority kids, is a role model for minority kids, teaches respect for diversity in the classroom? Finance a chaperone and a class or a field trip to a local museum or something similar. Designate an annual scholarship as encouragement or motivation for a kid who may not have had the best grades, but is now demonstrating an effort to change his or her life and could use that little bit of extra support. And on a more individual, personal note, buy some dolls, toys, books, choose TV shows and movies for your kids and grandkids that show people from different races, religions, and nationalities. And if you really are able, make historically Black colleges and universities and the American Indian College Fund beneficiaries through your will. If you change the life of a little child, remember me. I was once that little child. And this is your opportunity to back up words and conversation with action to eradicate racism, secure justice, build peace. I'm offering you the opportunity to be on the right side of history. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Carolyn. Thank you so much. So we want to open it up now and have people engage you if they'd like with questions or comments. I don't know do we want to use the raise your hand or we're a pretty small group. We might just unmute and reach out to you, Carolyn. Anybody have a question?
I don't, but I thought the presentation was wonderful. Thank you so much, Carolyn.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Well, while people are maybe thinking about it, I wanted to give another plug for you said education and our particular one of our things at the Empathy Surplus Congress is distributing this pocketbook to kids, and we have a UNICEF advisor who says which has surprised me, said the younger we can get these pocketbooks, and it's illustrated, into the hands of kids, the better. And I said, so why is that? And she said, well, when we polled, surveyed the refugees in the world, it wasn't shoes that they wanted or clothes or food. It was an education for their children, you know, and they wanted things that they could do, you know, with their youngest kids. So this project is a great thing for you to do. And I said, wow, that's great. So while I rambled on there, anybody have a question or a comment for Carolyn?
I have a question for me.
Yeah.
This is Carolyn. While
Yeah.
you all are still thinking, I have a question. Sometimes I'm asked and sometimes I'm not because two people are too polite. But here's the question directed to me. I'm really bothered by this group that calls themselves Black Lives Matter. I mean, don't white lives matter? Don't all lives matter? And this is my answer. If I had been organizing the group and giving it a name, I would have, and they were really set on something like this, I would have said Black Lives Matter, comma, TOO, too. Because the point of that name is not to say that the rest of the world doesn't matter. The point of that name is to get your attention to say, we matter as much as you, but we're not being treated as we do, particularly at the hands of overzealous, that's the politest thing I can say about the police officers is overzealous. Some of them are frankly murderers because there comes a point when what they're doing cannot be justified as being reasonable force. But yet it happens repeatedly. And not only does it happen repeatedly, but grand juries refuse to indict them. So yes, when we say Black Lives Matter, that's why we're saying it. And the day, you know, if the day would come when our lives mattered as much as everybody else's, then maybe we'll get ourselves a new name.
Yes. Yes.
Carolyn, can I make a comment about that? Because
Thank you. Good. See, I knew I'd start something. Go ahead.
So the issue here is that there's always been an implied too. Black people have never felt, and of course I'm not the speaker for all Black people, but I'm just saying for myself and those that I know, it was never meant to mean that our lives matter over anyone else's, because there's been this historical precedence of racism and discrimination. You know, the statement was made that Black Lives Matter as well as everybody else's lives. The name would just be too long. So they just shortened it to Black Lives Matter. And the people that consistently question that, to me, it's just race baiting. You know, it's like, you know, I didn't mean that your life doesn't mean anything and my life means more than your life. You know that. But there's already this historical precedent that has been set in this country for the last, I don't know, 300 something years. So.
I see Erin unmuted herself. She's got a comment maybe.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in with that. I think unfortunately in today's day and age with everything's got to be in like little tweetable chunks, you know, and there are certain people that have really capitalized on these tweetable chunks. And so while many people don't feel that, they've used it as an opportunity for those that do feel that, you know, whatever, they have used it as an opportunity to make it into something it's not. So I think, you know, there's many of us that never even crossed my mind, but I think the comma two, unfortunately, would have prevented a lot of folks from exposing themselves and capitalizing on that.
Yeah. And just to respond, of course, I'm not advocating that they change it now and add the comma and the two, but yeah, I'm a lawyer, and a job of a lawyer is to communicate and to persuade, and so you always think about how words matter. So if you're spending all your time explaining what the term Black Lives Matter means, instead of actually getting to the point of what you're all about, then you're not communicating as successfully as you'd like. And that's what's happened with the phrase Black Lives Matter is, I get it, but as so many people don't, that we spend our time on the defensive explaining it instead of,
Right.
let's talk instead about police brutality.
Yes, yes.
Well, I wanna-
It's, oh, so unfortunate. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to make a comment, just a quick one about framing, which is what this group is all about. And I want to suggest that the Black Lives Matter argument that is going on, that Aaron and Carolyn have described, is good for the movement, because as Dr. Lakoff's book illustrated, that was entitled "Don't Think of an Elephant." When you talk about the words Black Lives Matter, you have to think of Black lives mattering. Even if you don't agree with the term, you have to think about it. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing that the two is not there. You know, when people challenge, well, why don't all lives matter? You get to have a conversation about why it matters. And that's a big deal, you know, so from a framing point of view. So just the other thing too, I want to just ask you, Carolyn, of parents and grandparents, white parents and grandparents of Black children. How can we help those kids? I have 5 Black grandchildren, 16 to 6, 17 to 6, and one biological grandchild. You know, I'm just constantly, one of the reasons I ask you, I'm just constantly worried about our world.
Can I answer that, Sean?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Greg.
Go, Greg, go.
So I have 2 step kids that are white. So, and my son, he's been with me since he's 4. So the best, way to deal with it is to be honest about it. That's really it. Because kids are not stupid. They see what's going on. They hear what's going on. Just be honest about it and explain. And when something happens that you think is, racially provocative, have a conversation with them and say, hey, what did you think about that? How did that make you feel? And then share with them, the right way, the caring citizen way that they should be approaching this. And that's what I've done. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also the key to that is for the kids, to raise your kids and grandkids to be strong, to be proud, to understand that when people say things like this, they don't define you. That person that made the ugly remark doesn't define you, you define you. So that you deflect it back to the sayer and not to the child. And then of course, the more opportunities you can expose kids to people who look like them, who are doing well, then the better they're going to feel that one, they're not second class, and that they have a chance to be somebody and make something of themselves someday because others have gone before them. And I want to add something that Greg said earlier, and I say it also. I don't speak for Black people. I'm not the spokesperson. I'm just me living my life, and my life has been really wonderful. And they say sometimes that somebody has not died in vain. Well, if I ever cross paths with George Floyd in another life, I am going to tell him that he did not die in vain, because for many years, Blacks have been killed with what I think was excessive force by police officers, and everyone's always looking for an excuse for the police officer. Well, what did the guy say? Maybe he talked back to him. Did he have to have his hands in his pockets? Did he reach for something? It's always trying to put the blame on the Black person to justify the brutal beating or the murder. But this case in black and white for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, there was no deniability, and it went worldwide. And if I could do it, in addition to saying to George, man, you did something, the second thing I would do is nominate that young lady for a Nobel Peace Prize or a Presidential Medal of Freedom, because she stood there for 9 minutes and photographed that police officer. And he saw her, as did 3 other officers probably who were in the area, and she did it.
Yep. Yep.
I'd like to add that I think we all need to step out of our comfort zone. I'm just thinking my white privilege moment where I just an aha moment for me. We had our best neighbors, our favorite neighbors living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is a racist hotbed, happened to be an African-American family. And their young son was my son's best friend. And Becky, the mother, used to joke with me that I was the whitest white girl in Tulsa because I have this fair Irish skin. She would tease me about it. But I remember the boys were 13 and they were going to go trick-or-treating. And Becky called me over and she said, I want you to hear this. And she was giving Kellen the talk. It's going to be dark. There's police officers. Make sure, telling him before he went out to trick-or-treat, how he had to conduct himself. And that was, I mean, and I just stared at her and she said, oh, my white girlfriend, you don't get this, do you? And I said, no, what is this? She said, he could get in trouble. And Devin being with him could make your son in jeopardy. And if that's a problem, I understand, and they don't have to trick or treat together. And I had never experienced that before. I had never crossed my mind before that just going out and doing something as innocently as trick-or-treating on Halloween was an incident where a Black parent had to sit down with their son and say, you know the rules. This is how you conduct yourself. And that was my aha moment that, oh, this is a whole different way that people have to live and protect themselves. And I don't know anything about that. So that was a real aha moment for me. So take time to get to know the people of color that live in your neighborhood and be in their lives. And then you can really experience what they feel and what they go through. And yeah, it's just, it just makes me tear up now because I just remember being so shocked that you had to tell a 13-year-old boy how to act on Halloween night. You know, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, but it is. So,
Carolyn, I want to didn't get to introduce you to Wisdom Kualala, living in Ohio, a Boston University student, and from Malawi, visiting Malawi. And Wisdom his wife just had a baby here in Ohio, so he has a new American citizen in his family. And Arthur Canagus is with us. He's part of the World Peace Rotary Club. Catherine Palmer was one of our original founders, and she checks in with us from time to time. And Fitz Alert, who's having trouble, probably still having trouble with his sound, UN envoy from Guyana. So anybody else? We've still got some time to have a, you know, it's not every day that we have a human rights attorney of Carolyn's stature. Arthur.
I can jump in since you mentioned me. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate, Carolyn, you're helping amplify the empathy, and so important. Empathy is the key thing. You know, as we grew up, well, my parents actually met at the Friends Fellowship of Reconciliation meeting at the Friends meeting in Washington, where they were working to organize a sit-in on 14th Street to integrate the lunch counter. And my parents had been very active since the 40s, and you know, we grew up in Washington, D.C., and before I was born even, they would bring kids growing up in Washington, D.C., never got to see the Capitol or anything. They just lived in the ghetto and they couldn't, you know, really enjoy the wonders. So they would take kids to the Capitol and the monument and so on. And I have old pictures of them, and people would stop and stare at this white couple with Black kids, and you know, they might see a Black nanny with white kids, but never this. And you know, they go into a people's drugstore and they wouldn't be allowed to get water for the kids or food, or you know, there was just strict segregation. They had separate water fountains. It was shocking to my parents. And you know, they loved these kids, and they would go to, when we went, my brother and I were the only white kids in a Black summer camp in Rock Creek Park. And you know, empathy has always been, you know, a part of our life as we grew up. And I think, you know, it is, I mean, it's clearly, there has been progress, but it's always come at the cost of, as you said, something shocking that happens that wakes people up. And it's sad, but I think, you know, we have 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think overall we're moving forward. It's so shocking to be in this period where we're seeing, you know, the massive racism going up all the way up to the presidential level. And then we also see people waking up out of it. And I'm producer, as Chuck knows, and he's part of it, of a movie called The World Is My Country. And I think once we break out of these boxes and these divisions and recognize that we are all one, we have a great deal of power. And I think we're discovering our oneness, and we're breaking through, battling the, you know, the barriers that have divided us. And most of it, you know, comes out of ignorance, fear. I mean, just this morning, someone was playing a song for me about, you know, the world won't have peace till every one of us can look the other in the eye. And I think that's partly what happened watching the Floyd, you know, when we're looking directly and we're seeing people eye to eye and we see it, we've developed empathy, and we're beginning to develop that empathy with these Zoom conferences. And the more we can make them cross boundaries, cross borders, cross political sides, cross divisions, Arab, Israeli, you know, whatever the crazy divisions in the world, how we can reach people on the other side, we discover our humanity and that we are all one. And it's powerful to be part of this with you. And thank you to Carolyn and to Chuck for bringing us together, and each one of you, and Karen. Yes.
Matthew Medane has his hand up. Use that.
Hi, Carolyn, and hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I studied peace and conflict studies at Cal, and I got to learn a lot about international organizations and community partnerships. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see the role of community organizations like the Rotary Action Group for Peace in enacting change in what is essentially a domestic issue, like the fight for racial justice in America?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, as for the Rotary Action Group for Peace, I don't consider it a community organization as much as an international one. And the Rotary International itself is tiptoeing around our subject. In fact, they came out with a statement against racism in June of 2020, about the time that everybody else or every other organization in business was issuing one. And as soon as I read it, I thought, wow, this is really weak. Everybody who cares about the subject is going to say this is milquetoast and we can do better. But since I'm a senior Rotary, we call him a senior Rotary leader. I've been around a lot of RI presidents and vice presidents and directors and trustees who come from all over the world and have to meet together and come to a common decision on everything. So they bring all their backgrounds, their ethnic backgrounds, their national backgrounds, their religious backgrounds, even their racist backgrounds to the table to come up with something. And so although the average Rotarian may read that statement and think it was lukewarm, I got to tell you, the fact that they issued anything at all was an achievement. Okay, so that's the first one. The second thing is, I don't know if George Floyd's murder brought this about, but I know that he died in May, and in July, Rotary established a Rotary International committee called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And being an international group, they had to describe it in a way that it has a focus on Rotarians and the subject matter all over the world. So it's not just for America and Blacks and George Floyd. But right now they're having a series of speakers once a month on diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. And the one, I think just a week ago, was on the Black experience in Rotary. And they, again, because they had to be international, the speakers, there were two or three from the US. They all were of Black skin, but they were from different parts of the world. There was one from Nigeria. There was one from Brazil. There was one from Great Britain and two from the US. So Rotary is doing what it can to address the subject and how we as Rotarians can make a difference. But there are some changes that you might want to make that Rotary can't do because they're political in nature. And so I'm sure you all can find other organizations to belong to where you can be activists in that respect. And I have one takeaway for you now, honing in. You're going to have to hold with me for a minute because this is going to take a little explaining. Think about our criminal justice system. Someone commits a crime. The police arrest the person. They collect the evidence and they turn it over to the district attorney. The district attorney establishes a legal case to take it to court. The police officer is often coming in to testify about that crime. So in essence, the district attorney and the police are partners in prosecuting crime. All right, put that on one side. Over here on the other side, now we get a police officer who is accused of excessive force. Who is going to put together the case? The district attorney's office. The partner, who will have to be a partner after the case is over. My feeling is there's not going to be accountability and justice for excessive police brutality until independent prosecutors are named whenever there is an accusation like this. I'm not accusing district attorneys of deliberately not trying, but they're in a conflict of interest position. It's an untenable position. And they don't deserve it. And actually, George Floyd's don't deserve it. So if you want to do something outside of Rotary, why don't you try and get this changed in your community or your state?
Thank you. Yeah.
That was a
Greg,
long
you had your hand up a minute ago.
Yes, I had one question and Carolyn made me think of another question based on what she just said, because I've had this argument or debate with others. So I agree with you. It's an untenable situation because the district attorneys partner with the police department all the time. So what does it look like if they had an independent prosecuting attorney or district attorney? What does that look like? How does that work conceptually?
Well, you know, different states probably have different ways of making it happen, but it's usually the state attorney general. And in fact, that's happening right now not on a police brutality issue, but in the state of New York. The current governor, you know, is in big hot water, 2 pots of hot water right now. And at first he thought he was going to assign the investigation, and someone said, no, you don't make that decision. It's really supposed to be the attorney general, turn it over. And after a lot of backlash, that is what he has done. The attorney general is going to appoint a law firm outside of the agency. Yeah.
So you're saying that local government should choose a third party to choose who the prosecuting attorney should be, correct?
I'm saying that local government ought to get someone outside to do the investigation and the prosecution. Yeah. And if local government doesn't have the authority, then it's the state attorney general. But it's an untenable situation. It's a conflict of interest. Any other time, you would bow out, and so everybody's looking bad.
Thanks.
And we're not getting any justice.
Yes, thanks for that, Carolyn. I appreciate it.
What reforms do you think are necessary in the judicial system as far as people of color receiving much harsher sentences than
well, mandatory sentencing is one way of assuring that that a court doesn't or a jury doesn't impose a different sentence based on your color. That's a real tough one. Another, of course, is making sure there's a lot of diversity in the courtroom, on the bench, in the jury box, as lawyers. And then I think public scrutiny. Some places have Justice Watch, where there are people who attend trials and report on what they saw, and then they on that individual trial, and then someone collates all the information and looks for patterns.
I wanted to ask Erin Rosiello, who was a candidate for the State House in Ohio, state rep from her district in Maineville, Ohio. If some of these kind of issues, how they came up in her run for the State House last year, if any.
So that's a really tough one because where I live, we are not a diverse community. It ends up being about a 70-30 split, and I hate to bring in politics into this, but Republican to Democrat 70-30. So this was not a hot topic. It was seldom discussed and seldom brought up in our community. However, with my background, parents both being freedom riders in 1961. Pardon me?
I said, were they? Oh.
Yeah. So mom was 6 months in Parchment Prison in Jackson, Mississippi. And dad, he wimped out. He did a starvation deal at the jail and was out in a month. But anyways, so this is not the typical community where I was raised, but it is definitely not one that the topic came up. And I think that's unfortunate because it was so important and so timely during that that time period in running for office.
Yeah.
I don't have a good story for you, Chuck. I'm sorry.
I was just curious. I didn't know. Yeah, didn't know.
Yeah.
What's the racial makeup of your district? Any idea?
I think I want to say between Asian and African American, I mean, just all like less than 15%.
Okay. Yeah. Ours is sort of the same way.
Yeah. And just saying, I didn't move here by choice. It was circumstance, but it's a really, really tough district.
So Carolyn, we're getting close to the end here, and I can't thank you enough for doing this. We got about 5 more minutes. Or any parting thoughts that you have for us?
Well, as I said, my memories on this subject go back to the 50s, and there have been a lot of conversations since the 50s. And personally, I'm tired of conversations and I'm tired of talking. I realize some people are having their first conversation, and some people have got a lot of pent up stuff that they got to get off the chest before they're going to feel better. But I'm personally at a stage where I just think it's important to do something. Yes. So have these conversations if you need them, but do something. I mean, I gave you a long laundry list of things you could do. Pick one tiny one and do it. Yeah. And know that you did something besides just talk.
Yes.
And I thank you for that.
And this group, if you forgot what the laundry list is, we're going to be posting this recording, so you can go back and look at the laundry list.
And I will email it to you.
Yep, there you go. There you go. Miriam, do you, you've been kind of quiet. You don't have to say anything. I was just wondering if you had any comments.
Oh, I really appreciated the presentation, Carolyn. And I guess the one thing that was on my heart was as Black History Month has progressed, I've been really, it has come upon me the impression and the knowledge that Black people who've had horrible things happen, like George Floyd's family and the others who've been killed, a lot of them say, no, we don't want a violent reaction. They speak out against violence, and please don't resort to violence in your feelings of revenge. And it just is amazing to me that Black people come to that understanding that that's not going to help the situation at all. To just keep doing something, like you said, just keep doing something that will help the situation, but not violently. So, and the fact that the Black race has survived and prospered and done wonderful things, and it hasn't. Yeah, it could have been more, but it hasn't completely fallen out of sight. So anyway, I think there's a lot of accolades we can give to the Black people, that they've survived and that they still come out on nonviolence.
Yeah.
Catherine, do you have anything you want to comment on before we leave? So, well, again, Carolyn, it's, oh, did I see another hand go up? Arthur.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a brief comment. Many people have seen like nonviolence as somehow being weaker, but actually it's the greatest power. And if the Black movement had every time a Black church got bombed, they would bomb a white church. If there'd been this, take out every time a hanging, another hanging, if that had gone on, you could have a war that would go on forever, like in the Middle East, where one side retaliates and the other retaliates and it never ends. I think part of the incredible power, even though at the moment it may feel like weakness, how this horrible thing happened and we didn't strike back, but it's actually so much more powerful, and it's what has led to some incredible changes. And that kind of nonviolent power has brought down mighty dictatorships and is really the strong force. Military force and killing people just creates more enemies and doesn't have any real power. And I think once the world, one of the wonderful, you talked about the contributions, one of the wonderful contributions is to learn the power of nonviolence as a strong force that can really help shift our world.